You know, when I did these interviews and I recorded them and I saved them, I never considered that other people were going to be listening to them. You know, the thought that I'm recording this and that sometime in the future people are going to be checking out these interviews and listening to them never occurred to me. I never thought about it at all. My only thought in doing these interviews was I want to get the best story as possible for the paper. I mean, I always loved music, and I was a teenager during the 60s, so it was a very exciting time. My friend was the drummer in a rock and roll band, so there were all these musical instruments lying around. My friend, the guitar player, said, "Why don't you play bass?" I don't know how to play bass. What are you talking about? I had never touched a bass in my life. He taught me how to play Sunshine of Your Love by Cream. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, bum, bum. So I became a bass player. I worked really hard trying to become the best bass player that I possibly could. So I played with the Belmonts for about 3 years on and off. I turned 30 on the road that year. And I looked at the trumpet players and I thought to myself, you know, I don't want to be sitting back of the bus when I'm 50 years old, traveling around doing this. And I realized I was never going to be Paul McCartney, and that maybe there was something else in life that I should be doing. I had always loved writing. I loved reading music criticism. I thought, geez, all right, let me give it a shot. I had never written one single piece of journalism ever. January 1980, I wrote my first piece for the Real paper. They paid me $75, which seemed pretty good, so I started writing. Somewhere along the line, they sent me off to interview Dizzy Gillespie, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, as a bass player, I wasn't in line to performing with Dizzy Gillespie, but now here I am as a writer, and we're having this, you know, one-to-one conversation. I mean, Dizzy Gillespie, what a legend.
I don't think I'm a legend. You see, that's the thing. It doesn't bother me at all what the other people think, you know, because I don't feel such a legendary creature. I don't think that my contribution was any more or less than any other guys who established a style. I appreciate the affection that people who have heard me over the years, and that's enough for me.
Well, the Real paper went out of business in June of 1981. So I wrote a little bit for the Boston Phoenix. I did a few things for the Globe. And I started doing a lot for the Boston Herald, which was in terrible financial shape at that point. It was on the verge of going out of business. As the 80s were beginning and I was trying to get the Herald to cover music, punk rock was exploding, new wave music was exploding, The Clash, Elvis Costello, Aerosmith and the J. Giles Band, The Cars, Bruce Springsteen. You know, all acts from around the world were Boston was a place to play, so it really made no sense that the Herald wasn't covering music. So I would go looking to get interviews with the most important musicians who were coming to play in Boston, and, you know, I would call up the publicist, and the publicist would sound puzzled and say, "Oh, you're Larry Katz from the Globe you're calling from?" I'd say, No, I'm calling from the Herald." They'd say, "The Herald? Does the Herald cover music?" I'd say, "Yeah, well, we do."
I read somewhere that you had given up smoking in the past couple of years. About how long ago was that?
91.
And have you really noticed a change in your already magnificent voice?
Yes, I have, no doubt about it. I should never have smoked.
Well, it didn't hold you back, though, too badly.
Yeah, but I can definitely tell the difference. And I'm singing some notes I haven't sung since I was about 16 now.
The paper was still in a precarious financial position, So it was always the feeling that we were the underdog. And that really propelled everyone at the paper to work as hard as they could. We were outmanned, outgunned, and outfinanced. The Globe had the money, it had a staff that was at least twice as large, if not 3 times as large as the Herald, and it was financially secure. But we felt like underdogs. We were like the scrappy fighters just trying to find ways to compete with the Globe any way that we could. You know, in the early days, I would sometimes hear from a publicist or someone at a record company, and they'd say, "Oh, we're not talking to you. We're already talking to the Globe." I'd say, you know, people who read the Herald, they don't read the Globe, and vice versa. I'd say, you know, the Herald is the working class paper of Boston. It's the blue-collar paper. Minority communities read the Herald, not the Globe. So you're telling me you're shutting these people out?
What's your name, Larry?
Yes.
Well, I was myself, but I had been influenced by playing popular music at Arlene Smith's studio. I had been playing lots of popular music at her studio, and I didn't know that I was going to become a singer, but when I went to the first nightclub that I played in, I simply played all the songs that I'd heard these kids trying to sing at her studio, and it was just kind of natural to me. After 20 years of training for classical music, it was an outlet. I just felt let out of a cage that I could play and improvise with the classical technique.
I see. So did you just get sick of playing the big spaces?
I've always hated them. I never liked them. I think the music business went to hell in a handbasket when we artists went into coliseums. I remember that when we were all at the Troubadour, Joni Mitchell and Neil Young this is the Buffalo Springfield then, and James Taylor and Elton John, we all went and saw each other's performances. It was a way that we could influence each other and experience each other. As soon as I went into the Coliseum, I'm not going to go into one of those Coliseums to see anybody. I don't care how good they are. It's vast and unfriendly feeling and cold, and it makes you feel anonymous.
I think when I started out doing interviews, they were almost always done in person. So the emphasis shifted. Once I started working to the Herald, I would say probably 75% of the interviews I did were over the telephone. So how do you record an interview off of a phone, which is a handheld phone? There were no cell phones back then. How do you do it? Well, the answer was at Radio Shack.
The best in America, Radio Shack.
In the 80s, Radio Shack sold this little device, which was a suction cup that you would stick on to the part of the phone where the voice came through. And then there was another wire or something, that stuck into your tape recorder. So it was that primitive. The problem was that it didn't always pick up too great.
As I was listening to your...
Do you have a bad phone?
No, I'm talking to a headset, though. Do I sound crappy?
Oh, man. Oh, okay. So that's what it is. My God. Yeah, it's really awful.
Sorry, I apologize.
It's distorting and cutting out.
Let me wiggle it and see. Is that any better?
You should move it away from your mouth.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
There's been a transition in music since 8 years ago. And it's called hip-hop. And it's a different groove out here. It's a different way of walking and talking. So, can you hear me?
No, I can't. I'm losing you. I can't hear you at all.
Hello?
Hi, you there? Hello? 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 Hello?
Well, certainly you're always trying to establish this friendly connection with whoever you're talking to. But you're not friends. Not really. But you kind of want to hope that they're going to feel that way about you.
Well, I'm going to have to leave you because I've been told I have to do something else.
stars, celebrities, most of them, they've been through the interview thing. So a lot of it is we're both doing our job. I mean, one of the things you need to learn in an interview is to shut up. Keep your mouth shut. If someone's talking, don't interrupt them. You know, or if there's a pause, maybe don't say something right away. Maybe they'll keep talking. But, you know, we all have our own egos. So if I'm talking to this really cool person, the ego creeps in there and I want them to think I'm cool. But sometimes I'll listen back to an interview and I'll go, I don't want to hear you. Why didn't you keep your mouth shut?
That's great. I love it.
But, you know, another thing, hey, let me finish.
Good morning. It's David Bowie calling.
Hi, David. How are you this morning?
Pretty tired.
Me too.
Tired.
I've been listening to the album, and man, that's a weird record you made.
It does seem to be that way. Yeah, I'm still listening.
You were quite explicit that you had no intention of ever performing your pop hits ever again.
That's right.
Is that a vow that you plan to maintain?
Well, it's more than a vow to me. I mean, to me, it's an absolute necessity to survive as an artist. It really is extremely difficult to even conceive of performing things like Major Tom and all that with any sense of performance integrity anymore. It's too long. They're too worn. I have to put myself in rather adventurous or hazardous situations. It's what I personally enjoy, and I always know that if I'm in a comfortable situation, nothing much is going to come out of it.
You know, one of the very worst interviews I ever had was with Al Green, who I love. I love Al Green's music. It was the first time I ever talked to him. I was very much looking forward to it. I got him on the phone, and I say,
Are you excited to be playing with the Duke Ellington Orchestra? Oh, yeah. Okay, what are you going to sing with them? Are you going to do any Duke Ellington songs or Al Green songs? We'll do some things.
It went on like that. I could get nothing out of this guy. About 20 years after that, Al Green was making a comeback, and the publicist called and did I want to talk to Al Green? And I'm thinking, do I want to talk to Al Green? I don't know. I said, well, you know, I love Al Green. I'll give it a shot. I get him on the phone. He's a delight. We talk for an hour. He's fantastic. So you just never can tell.
I just thank the big man upstairs, man, because now people are beginning to say, oh, now I know what he means by take me to the river. Wash me down, cleanse my soul, and put my feet, please, back on the ground. Because at the time I wrote that song, my feet wasn't nowhere near the ground. In fact, I was high as a kite. But I wrote that in a plea. And I seen this man preaching on the banks of this river, baptizing these people, and they was like rejoicing and shouting, and I mean, it was such joy and exuberation. I wrote, sitting there looking at him on the side of the river too, take me to the river, wash me down, cleanse my soul, put my feet on the ground. And that's how that got started.
When you're a newspaper reporter, no matter what section you're writing for, you never want to get scooped. The worst thing that can happen to you is you go into the paper and your editor comes running over to you holding the globe and says, why didn't you have this story? There was never a good answer. It's because, yeah, I should have had that story. I lost. We got beat. On the rare occasions I could get an interview that the Globe didn't have that they wanted, I knew that people over at Morrissey Boulevard were very unhappy. The end result, though, was that it made both papers better, because the Globe was in fear that the Herald would have a story that they didn't have, and vice versa.
Do you have a sense of regret that you've got this fantastic professional life but you don't have that gold band?
Well, I've pretty much come to terms with the fact that I'm not married, because that's kind of okay. I figure I can still be married if I want to. I do regret very much not having one or two kids. I really do. And but it was just never the right time. Anytime that it almost happened, there was a big tour coming up, or there was a big record that was being finished, and it was never that I didn't want to have them. It was that everybody else around me's life would be completely screwed up if I said, listen, I'm going to take 2 years and go and have a baby. I just could never do that. I could never, stop that whole machinery that was going on for so long. I was not brave enough to do that.
Having lost George and, of course, John those years ago, does all of this make you closer to Ringo now?
We've always been very close. I mean, we've always been very close. We're like brothers, There's just something that would never break that bond with us. We've just been through too much together. Certainly don't bother arguing anymore. But there's no cause to anyway. This again, it's we're not in the middle of the Apple feuds. It was only really during that sort of sticky time when Apple was breaking up and the Beatles were breaking up that we sort of lost it. And, deep down, we've always loved each other.
My 3 most memorable interviews were with, the first one was with Bob Marley. I'd only been writing for a year and a half, and this was in September of 1980. Bob Marley was going to play at the Heinz Auditorium in Boston, which turned out to be the second to last performance that Bob Marley and the Wailers ever did. I think it was the day of the show. He was staying at the Logan Hilton at the airport, and I went out there late that afternoon to interview him. It was a group interview. There were like a dozen journalists there, but they didn't show up until later on, so I got to have a pretty special interview with Bob Marley, who died less than a year later.
Was there people in your family who were musical when you were growing up?
It was very musical. My grandfather used to have a organ, fiddle, banjo, and guitar, and then play a music named rumba. Country and western.
Yeah.
Some of that type of country and western thing is the rumba business. All right.
I interviewed Miles Davis, one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. I went down to his apartment in Manhattan. I spent an hour with Miles, who, despite his reputation as being a sometimes fearsome character, was very welcoming and talked to me for pretty much close to a solid hour.
Harvard this term, they're going to be teaching a course, and it was called Miles Davis, Evolution of the Music, or something like that.
Yeah, why not? I didn't realize it, but they did, so,
I mean, is that...
I hate it because it's always tempting. It's always tempting for me to read and see what I did do.
So do you stay away from that just so you don't get kind of hung up in, thinking too much about what it is instead of doing it?
I'm 61, man, and I haven't done it yet, so there.
That's great.
Send me a copy.
And then I interviewed James Brown, because I love the funk. I flew down to his office in Augusta, Georgia, and I spent an hour sitting there with James Brown. It was like having an audience with a king. Because I came in there, he was dressed, his hair was all done up, the beautiful process. He could have walked out on stage.
Get past the people, get past the hit man.
Considering how much of an effect you've had on the music that we hear today, do you think that you've received the amount of recognition that you've deserved?
Well, a black entertainer, unfortunately, we deal with societies, and it was hard to get past being just black, but be a man and still fight for decency and integrity. Because the minute you say I disagree, they say you're too black.
Mm-hmm.
If you're black. If you're a white man, do it, they say you're a rebel. The city should be based on integrity and the contents of what you're about, other than the color of your skin.
The Herald circulation reached its peak in the 90s. It was doing really well. And then this thing called the internet took off. Nobody knew what this was going to mean for newspapers. It was very puzzling. Newspapers thought that the way to do it was to give the product away for free, which turned out to be a disaster. There's a similarity in the music business that nobody could have foreseen. Physical music is gone. By and large, it exists, but it's really not where the money is. Nobody had a crystal ball to see how things were going to change for the worse. And so now as I look back, I say to myself, boy, if I would have known that I was in a golden age of journalism and the golden age of the Herald, I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I would have known that this was as good as it was ever going to get.
I'm being told it's your last question.
I know that you've had well-publicized problems with alcohol and whatnot. Is touring sober something that is a different experience for you and that concerns you at all?
Yes, it's an absolutely different experience. It's new, but I think not only touring's different now that I'm clean. It's just living. The whole deal is different, and it's a lot more fun these days, and I'm enjoying the days a lot more.
So this is something you're mostly doing it for enjoyment?
Well, I'm a drummer. What else can we do? I'm not going to sit at home and play for myself.
Well, when I donated my archive of tapes to Northeastern, one of the things I was curious about was to see how many interviews were in there, because I really didn't have an exact idea. I knew I had counted all the tapes that I had, and I knew there were about 500, but a lot of the tapes had 2 or sometimes 3 interviews on one tape. We have now determined that there's very close to 1,000 interviews in there that are now in the Northeastern Library archive.
This collection is particularly important because of its ephemerality. The fact that Larry actually put the tapes into a box and saved them is really special. And for Northeastern, this was a huge undertaking to make the Katz tapes available to the public. The process took about 2.5 years. This was many, many people in the library working on these tapes so that we could get all of the information. And of course, these tapes were old. There's scratch, there's pops, there's all sorts of background noise. Larry really interviewed everybody.
Well, certainly, I did my first interview in 1980 and probably the last one in the archives from around 2005. So you got about a quarter century there. Yeah, I'm proud of it. One part of me is like, hey, man, I was just doing my job. What I think is special about my particular archive is the range of people that I spoke with. It really is. It's about the artists involved, that I believe their work is important, and what they have to say is oftentimes important. When people listen to these interviews now, it really is a peek behind the curtain. They were not made with the thought in mind that anyone else was going to be listening to them. So I've spoken with lots of great musicians who are no longer with us, and that's a little touching. And the idea that, I can contribute to their legacies in some sort of tiny way, that's all the satisfaction that I need